What's happening, everyone? Throughout the Swing Fix, we've really focused and isolated on certain clubs, but today I want to isolate on a certain problem. And it's a problem that over this past decade I've watched time and time again, and that is the lack of understanding how to use the ground so we're not really maximizing our power, but then the other dreaded thing, which is that idea of swaying off the ball. And this is one of those things that I don't care how good of a swing we have, if we have a sway in our golf swing, we are going to have inefficient contact. We're not going to be able to compress the ball, and most importantly, all of our buddies are going to be out hitting us time and time again. One of those first common mistakes that tend to happen is as a golfer is trying to load that weight, they tend to allow too much lateral movement to the side, which creates this sway. And what I see with all my students is as we're getting up to the top, all of that weight's loaded onto that right side. And what ends up happening is if we load too far over here, well, now I can't rotate. And you can see how restricted this hip mobility is. And so throughout this, we're gonna really discuss the importance of using this right leg in a proper way to really create that rotational force without locking the leg, because that's one of those other big no-nos in golf, that any time we start locking limbs, what's going to end up happening is our balance is going to come out of sync. We're going to start falling all over the place, and we're not really going to be able to shift that weight properly. So one of my favorite feels that we like to use with this is the sensation of a lawnmower. And what I mean by that is I think we've all throughout our lives pulled a lawnmower chain. And so what I want us to really work on right away is we're gonna get into that nice posture. And remember, posture in golf is not squatted, because once again, if we squat, we're gonna reduce mobility, but posture is staying nice and tall, pushing into the back of our hips here, and feeling stable in the balls of our feet. As we start this feel, what I want us to think about is the sensation of pulling a lawnmower. And what you can notice here is how my right leg is loading, but most importantly, using that flexion in my knee to create better rotation. I know all of us like to say, I can't move, I have terrible mobility, but what it really ends up being is we're not understanding how to use our footwork properly. We're not understanding the ground properly to where we're not creating mobility. I got stuck in that throughout my career, thinking that I just can't rotate due to my body style and stuff like that, but really it was me not having the understanding on how to use my feet. And so a great feel, like I was saying, is the sensation of a lawnmower. Another one that I've always used over the years is thinking about like a pulley system at a gym. And so what I like to do is grab, kind of thinking like a chain on a pulley here. So I pull the chain and let that chain go, which in turn is what's going to create that rotational force throughout the body. Another good and easy way to kind of create some resistance so you can really feel that load is grabbing resistance band, rubber bands type thing. And what you want to do is you're going to step on the end here and use this to pull. And what you should start to feel when you're doing this is this idea of tension building, but most importantly, your obliques engaging. And when we're in this position, I want you guys to really make sure that all of this tension's on the interior right of your leg. Remember, not on the outside right of your leg, because we really need this loading foundational force to create the remainder of those movements. Throughout this, that is one of those things that you're going to hear me say time and time again is rotational force, lateral force. Why these are so critical in golf is this is how we create speed and be able to repeat it under pressure. So what I want to talk about now is this idea of stability while we're loading these forces, okay? So one of my favorite tools to use for this is just a weight block. You can obviously use a household towel just to create this sort of ledge. But with the whole thought process with this is getting us that understanding of how to load this force as we're going up. So maintaining this stability. And what the nice thing with a block or a towel is going to be is this idea of pushing off of it. And remember, when we're pushing, we don't ever want to see this. We don't ever want to see this full locked leg, because what that's going to create is over the top. That's going to create more sway. So what we want to be seeing is this sensation of using the block, pushing up, and what you're going to really feel, which is kind of the weirdest part of ground force, is this sensation of opposite forces. And what I mean by that is when you're on this block or whether you're on the ground, you're going to feel like your right foot is pushing away from you to get this hip to actually open. And we're going to use a lot of opposite forces to really stabilize the body. And this is why one of the things that I see with most people, why it's so confusing, is it makes, it's hard to comprehend the idea of pushing one way to then go the opposite way. But that's the whole idea of ground force, and that's how we really start creating that coil within our body. And what I'm talking about with coil is the whole rotational coil. And how it was always explained to me was like that sensation of looking at a spring. And if we had a spring that was loosely coiled as we released it, well, that's not going to create any torque. It's not going to create any speed. But if we take a really tight spring, such as our hips, and coil that, well, as we release, that's going to create that snapping force, which in turn is going to create that torque that we're all looking for. One of those other great feels that really helped conceptualize how I get my forward momentum through, and if you've taken lessons with me before, I've beat this into your brain, is this sensation of an uppercut. And what that means is, as we are kind of doing that lawnmower thought, getting our energy loaded into this right side, as we shift and go through, we want to be uppercutting. So we want to make sure all of this energy is coming through impact. And how that really works is, as we get here, we load into it, we're pulling that energy up. From this position, we want to feel that first lateral force by pushing our left glute down and then feeling the uppercut come through. All right, so we have our awesome loaded force here. Now what do we do with it, right? Do we just stand there and let the body uncoil and flip the hands and hope and pray? No, what we need to do is understand the proper lateral forces, all right? So we have vertical forces, we have lateral forces, and we have the rotational forces in golf. And what's so interesting about how we do this properly is golf is always about holding the force as long as you can before we let it unwind. And that is one of those common things that I see time and time again, that, we get to the top and it's almost like our brains just say, job's done, let it go. And when we get here and stay on that back leg, well, what's that creating? Well, that's creating flipping. And so what we really want to be conscious of is how we're moving the weight properly. And so this is one of my favorite visual drills to use with my students. And what you want to do is, whether you have alignment sticks, great, or you happen to have 13 of them in your golf bag, put 2 clubs on the ground. You want to put 1 club just on the inside part of your right foot, and then you want to put 1 just inside of midline. What these are going to help you do is A, make sure our rotational and loaded forces are set here. B, understand how much lateral movement we can do. And C, understand that when we are loading the golf swing, we need to maintain our back to the target before we let the forces come through. As we get to, coming into the ball, I see this so often that people, they understand this part of it, loading the right knee, getting parallel with this stick, but they love doing something like this where they get really out of control with this hip slide. This is something we need to be very cautious of, because the point of it is we could have everything perfect, But if we fire too far ahead, now if our sternum gets way ahead like this, once again, that's going to create the need for your body to flip to make contact. And we're trying to maintain the angle so we can hold that compression into the ball. And so what I want us to look like is we're going to get this stick right on top. We want to get parallel with that interior stick here. We want to shift to the midline. And at this point, this is where the rotational and vertical forces combine. And so what I want us to see, guys, is the importance of how the glutes are engaging throughout this swing. And so when we are in this drill and loading this right leg, remember, we're not straightening, we're nice and loaded, but then from this position, as we do this lateral shift, we want to really focus on my left pocket going back and out, making sure we are popping this, which in turn creates that energy. Another good visual that's always helped me with this was this idea of thinking about my right knee going to my left heel. So making sure I'm pushing almost diagonally this way, which in turn helps get my left hip out of the way so I can just hold that angle coming into impact. So before we wrap this up, I want to hammer in one last final piece that is incredibly important in the ground force, and that is how to release the trail side and get this lead hip really firing properly. We can go back to one of these blocks or the towel, whatever you can feel to kind of force this sensation of pushing up. But the whole thought of this comes into is we've got all of this force loaded, we feel all this energy here, we're shifting our body, and what this is gonna really help us do too is not allow so much lateral shift into this, okay? Because like I said, we can ruin this whole thought process by allowing these hips to slide too much, which then in turn, we have to flip. And if you kind of notice when I flip, what happens? Well, my weight has to almost shift back to that right leg, which in turn, we're losing all of that power going into the ball. And so this idea comes in with load, shift, and then as we are pushing up, this right knee is gonna come around, and we wanna make sure that this left hip is going up and clearing, and making sure that we are nice and stable. I think the other piece that people tend to forget about in the ground force reactions and all of that is this idea of where the weight is within the feet. We're never going to our toes, we're never going to our heels, we're staying in the ball. And what you will feel, I would say, is this idea of, yes, we're definitely focusing more on this outer left heel as we are finishing the swing. We're definitely focusing more on the inner right heel, but we're never actually on the heels. So we want to make sure that that is a finite difference, that when we are doing this, it is not teeter-tottering back and forth with our toes, but it's making sure that we are nice and stable as we fire through, so this left side is cleared, right leg is posted, and the left leg is posted. So as we practice this week, whether it's inside or outside, I want to make sure that we are getting these forces in a chronological order. And what I mean by that is as we go through this swing, we want to make sure we are feeling that lawnmower pull, pulling the chain, whatever makes sense in your mind, feeling that weight loaded into this vertical force. Then from there, we want to feel that first lateral force, making sure that when we are here, we're not allowing too much lateral by sliding that hip out. And then the last two forces connecting with this sensation of vertical force to rotational force to really tie it in. I want you guys to all know all of these tools are at Growth Golf for you to use. Feel free to grab them right out of the teaching bay. Otherwise, make sure we're using something to help stabilize our hips, because not only is this the most important piece, but this is the foundation of your golf swing. This is how we really start tying in all these other elements that we've discussed throughout these swing fixes and really taking your game to the next level. Thanks for tuning into the Swing Fix, and we'll see you next month.